Hey everyone, this is Adam Horbit. Welcome to another episode with Sunflower Woodworking. Today, we're starting another project. It's actually a play/photography boat for a relative of a friend, a really good friend. And I'd like to give a quick shout out to the Central Indiana Woodworkers because this is not something I've built before. So I went out to them for some ideas. So shout out to all the men and women of the CIWW for your help and your ideas. All right, so what are we going to build? This boat is going to be anywhere from 4 to 5 feet long. It's going to be about between 2 and 3 feet wide with walls that are about 12 inches. Now, it's not going to be seaworthy. It's meant for play and for show. We selected Baltic birch because it's pretty solid and pretty stable. Good wood to work with, so we're going to use that. As far as finish, we haven't gotten that far yet. Client doesn't have any specific requirements. She just wants it to look nice. She gave us a picture. So this is one of those projects where, while we'd love to have plans or more details on the design, doesn't stop us. She gave us a picture of a bookshelf that she saw and said that she wanted something just like that to use for photography and for her kids to play with. So we got our material, starting with a sheet of 1/2 inch birch, and we just picked up this sheet of 1/4 inch birch to be able to make the sides and be able to curve it, which is one of the ideas we got from the Central Indiana Woodworkers. We were going to look at possibly doing some steaming and some other approaches, maybe even some cuts, but found that taking this stock here, once I cut it into the just under 12-inch strips, it's very pliable. As you can see, it just loves to wave. And surprisingly enough, it is a pretty flat sheet coming from a local big box store. Oftentimes they're pretty warped, but this is a pretty solid sheet, some good grain. Couldn't find anything to exactly match the grain on this sheet here, which would have been better. But definitely when we get into finishing, we'll see how we can incorporate that grain and make sure we have an overall good look throughout the entire piece. So stick with us. This is going to be a fun project, and hope we all learn a lot together. The first step we took was to take that 1/4 inch birch ply and cut it down into strips, about 30 centimeters. So give or take, it's about 12 inches. Cut them down into strips so that we can work with them to create the sidewalls. We're going to make them 2 layers thick. See how that looks, see how that works, see if it's thick enough. I might end up going to get another sheet and make it 3 layers thick. But now we're over here on the bench with our strips. And you notice that these blue tape that's on here, this is just painter's tape. And what painter's tape does, for those who don't know, that when you're cutting plywood with a track saw or any kind of saw, a lot of times you might get some tear out, which is the shredding of the wood right there at the cut line. Even though you have a very sharp blade, sometimes you get tear out. So what the blue tape is not to paint racing stripes, but it's just to help prevent the tear out and make sure we get nice clean edges on our cut. All right, so we're going to take the blue tape off, and then on our MFTs here, we're going to use bench dogs and clamps and some other things to try and form the shape of the boat. Now you notice that the 1/2 inch sheet of plywood is sitting back there. What I'm going to do is make the shape of the boat with the walls first, and then transpose that shape onto the actual plywood before we cut it. Right? So let's get working. So here's where we're at. So did some testing and finagling to try and get this down, to try and make this form, get into the shape I wanted to based on the picture. So we printed off the picture, did some relational measurements and that to try and get an idea of the widths and the lengths and where everything is placed. And then started to lay this out. I tried all the different tools and jigs and whatnots that I had for my dog holes and for my MFT, and ultimately had to make some jigs. So just took some scrap 2x4, cut it into strips, used some glue and some screws to make these L shapes, which then, as you can see, I put one on each side of the panel, and now using the T-track and the dog holes, I can control the shape of the boat. I can move all these in and out as I need to. Down here, I've got some bench dogs, holding some things while I was getting things placed. Took a scrap piece of 2x4, cut the shape of the front of the bow here, and then have one piece on the inside and then the other piece on the outside to kind of keep the front of the bow in shape. And then right now, just measuring where the different, don't know what they're called, but the different cross members that go across the boat to kind of get an idea of where they're going to be placed, how wide it's going to be at that point, and so on. So that's all good. What we're trying to figure out right now is, do we make the sides and then screw them in before we laminate the second strip of 1/4-inch birch ply on the outside, and then we can hide those screws on the inside so you don't see them. Didn't plan to use any screws on this. Was going to use dowels and glue. Much prefer that than screws, because especially working with thin material like this, you got to be careful with the screws. They'll go right through if you over tighten it. But we can definitely manage through that. So yeah, got to figure that out before we get going. So why was whether or not to create the cross members a tough decision? Well, first of all, one of the goals of this is, it's not a real boat, right? It's not going to float. It doesn't have the shape on the bottom of a real boat. It's meant to sit flat on a surface, whether it's in the grass or in the playroom. So it's meant to sit flat. And to keep the bottom from getting chewed up too much, one of the design considerations was to have the bottom recessed inside the walls, right? So have the walls of the boat kind of wrap around the bottom. And because I've got everything set up over here with the shape, it's like, oh, how do I maintain that shape when I'm actually going to glue up the other panel? Because remember, this is only 1/4-inch. It's not going to hold up to much abuse at all. So I got to glue on another 1/4-inch panel to make it 1/2 inch, maybe even a third panel. We'll see how strong the 2 1/4-inch are together. But I want to have that shape, and obviously you can see I got clamps on the top, so I can't just take a sheet of plywood, put it on top, and draw the outline, because number one, I'll get the outer dimension, not the inner. And number two, the clamps are in the way, right? So working through is like, well, how do I get it so that I don't lose my shape here? I finally got the shape dialed in. What I did was I put a couple pieces of 1/2-inch ply scraps that I had, same company, same supplier, same material, different sheet, but I checked the thicknesses almost exactly the same. We're like 1/10 or actually 1/100th of a millimeter difference in thickness, which could be the caliper for all I know. So put a couple pieces of scrap in there, measured off of that to the top of the sidewall, and then measured my width based on the center. So in the center of the boat, where the curvature of the boat's going to be the flattest, that's where I'll put that first piece. Obviously, for the piece in the back, the piece in the front that I'm going to have to put in, for those, I'm going to have a little bit of an angle on the cut because of the curvature. But this piece is relatively flat. So if I can get this one locked down, then I can free up some clamps and I can keep moving and put in the other 2 cross members into the boat, in the back of the boat, and then put one in the front of the boat, right? So I'm going to do that. I'm going to use, as much as I hate to use screws, I'm going to screw and glue it. So I'll take it apart, put some glue on the outer edge, and then probably put probably 1 to 1 1/4 inch screws in the sides. I'll use a bit to kind of taper off that hole a little bit so the screw sits nice and flush. And God help me that I don't over tighten the screw. I need to get it tight enough where it compresses that glue. I'll also put some parallel clamps on there to help squeeze that glue in, but definitely don't want to over tighten those screws and end up going through this 1/4 inch ply. Because while birch is good stuff, like any plywood, screws can go right through it. Right? So, gonna try it out. Okay, so we got the cross braces in, and it wasn't too bad. Took about an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours, get them all cut to figure out the angles and so on. And now you can see it's all clamped and glued up. So like I said before, this one here was the one that we just went straight across, right? So that's where the curvature is basically at 0. And then up here, this one here is about 26 degrees. And then this one, of course, because it's more of a taper, this one was only about 12 degrees. And you can see nice and snug right up to the top. And then I've got that gap at the bottom that's going to receive the base. Once we get that traced out and then cut. So we got there for the gap in the bottom for the base. And then, of course, like I said, we got clamping going on. Now the screws are doing most of the work with regards to the clamping. And I can show you here, they're adequately recessed, not too much where they're going to pop through. So those are kind of doing a lot of the bracing right now, and until the glue cures. I got an extended glue, which it's a type bond glue, which has extended working time. Gives you about an extra 10, maybe 15 minutes in addition to the normal curing time or working time, so that way you got time to kind of hone the angles in, get everything nice and tight and nice and fit, and then put the screws down and wipe up the excess glue. So very happy with how everything's come together so far. Tomorrow we will unclamp it and then start looking at how do we get that other layer of the 1/4 inch birch ply onto the outside. So it's been about 12 to 16 hours. The glue is good enough. We took all the clamps off, and now we're planning on preparing everything for putting the second layer of the 1/4 inch birch ply on the outside. So one thing I noticed after we took the clamps off is that everything's nice and firm, and the joints are nice and tight. But we do get a lot of movement in the different parts of the hull. Obviously, the center is nice and tight, but it's wavy, right? So when we put on that second layer, we're going to want to clamp down the insides to make sure that it stays nice and still, at least from the 3 dividers here. When we do the lamination, I've been looking at different options for how we're going to clamp it down to make sure we get good fixation all the way around that second layer of the 1/4 inch birch ply. Thinking that one of the best options is going to be using J-straps, kind of wrap them all the way around the hull, and then just use the ratchet to kind of tighten it down a little bit so we get good fixation between the 2 layers and squeeze out a little bit of that excess glue. But obviously you saw how much motion there is, so we're going to clamp down these inner pieces, and then we also have this tail piece sitting on the end. And these are just the excess pieces because we didn't cut it down before we glued up the cross members. We just left it all the way out there. So I'm going to use the oscillating multi-tool here, cut off this excess. Let's go ahead and get those pieces cut off and get the next 2 pieces sized up so that hopefully today we can be laminating or gluing on those next pieces of the hull. So we got those pieces cut off, and I'm not sure if you can see it from the video in the other camera, We did two things while we were cutting using the multi-tool to prevent tear out. So this is a handy trick when using a multi-tool, is take any card, could be a credit card, in this case it's an old AutoZone members card, and you put it on the surface where the blade is going to be resting while you cut. So in this case, when I was cutting these back panels, the card was sitting against here, and then when you put the blade, against it like this, instead of the blade rubbing up and down on the wood, it's actually rubbing up and down on the card. Now, it does leave a little tiny bit of a lip there because you're doing that, but that's nothing that a sander can't easily take care of. But it prevents this from getting all chewed up and getting all kinds of tooth marks or chips from like the edge of the blade and things like that. The other thing is, just like when we were cutting with the track saw, we use painter's tape, and I put it on the outside of the cut, so that way when the blade's coming through, it's not tearing out. Now you got these little bit of feathering here. So you can zoom in and see it. A little bit of feathering there, but that's not tear out, right? So that's all still well attached, no chips or anything in that wood or in that panel. So just a little bit of light sanding with a 220 grit or 120 grit will smooth that right out. Not so worried about it. Now, tear out's not a big deal in this case because we're going to be covering that, right? But, you know, practice how you play. I like to do it the best I can in every single step. So preventing a tear out means I'm not going to have any pockets behind the second layer. Even the screw holes that are on here from, or where the screws are from screwing in and gluing up these cross members, I'm going to fill those with putty, because you don't want any kind of voids in there. Otherwise, eventually the wood might set a little bit, and then you end up having little divots, maybe little divots inside your outer finish. So I always fill that stuff in. And like I said, for this, preventing that tear out always gives me a nice clean edge. So whenever you're working into the next step, if the previous step was the best it could possibly be, makes the next step that much easier. So tape and a card when using that multi-tool, again, prevents tear out, keeps the surfaces from getting marred or chipped or scored by the blade, right? Next, I'm going to run that, put a little bit of putty on these screw holes. Only put 2 screws in each side for each board, just enough to clamp down, because the screws are not really providing the strength. It is the glue that is between the end grain of this plywood piece and then the face grain on this plywood piece. So the glue is giving it most of the strength. So the screws are just there really to clamp down and reinforce it. So we got these holes from where the screw tip goes. We're going to fill those in with some putty, give it about an hour to dry, and then lightly sand around the screw holes, and then lightly sand off these edges, get them nice and smooth before we clamp on the next piece of plywood. So where we're at is that we took a couple pictures and sent them off to the client, because if you remember, the picture that we've got from which we made our designs and actually started working on this was actually of a bookshelf, and it had some extra dividers for shelves in the boat. But since this is going to be used for play and for photography, we didn't want to put all those shelves in there because it doesn't leave a lot of usable space. So the client agreed that we're not going to put any more dividers in here. This is as far as we're going to go. So after we got that confirmed, went ahead and did some patchwork. So like I said, we did do a couple screws to help firm up the glue up for the sides. So those have been all filled in and sanded down nice and smooth. Try to reduce the size of the patch as much as possible so that we don't have any kind of bulges or bumps inside of the glue between the next layer in between the 2 layers. And we also took some denatured alcohol, wiped everything down on both the layer that we're going to add and on the body of the boat. So the only thing left to do now is roll on some glue onto the 2 sides, and then we're going to use a few things to hold down the other layer during the glue up, so the glue has time to cure and it adheres very well to the body. So we are going to use a couple clamps in a couple strategic places and a couple of these bar clamps here that I made for this project. But we're also going to use some J straps. So I got a few of those. I don't need a ton of straps, but I feel like the more straps I have holding this together, the smoother the surface is going to be. So I'm going to put a few different straps around this, and then I've got these cawls that I'm going to stick underneath the straps to make sure that the straps don't wrap around the corner. Because if they wrap around the corner and they're putting pressure on this corner, it's going to cause the panel over here to push away from the panel underneath it. So I want that to be nice and taut, nice and flat. So we're going to use this cawl and adjust it here as we get the straps on and start tightening them down to make sure that the two layers are nice and flat together with good pressure. So now I'm going to get my bucket of glue and my roller, and we're going to glue up these sides. So we got the panels all glued up. We got everything clamped down. You can see in addition to the straps, we've got some cawls on there. We got some clamps. Everything is marrying up very, very well. A couple spots where it's looking a little questionable, but for the most part, the panels meet up very, very nicely. So looking forward to kind of seeing how this holds together once we take the clamps off in about 24 hours. Now we did use an extended release or extended cure time wood glue to give us more time to get the panels on there. Because ultimately, if the glue starts curing before, you might get some spots where it's just not going to adhere, or get some spots where the glue built up and now you got a bump. So use the extended cure time glue, which gives us a few extra minutes, but definitely was enough time to get those panels put on and clamped down. So it's been a couple days. We were originally going to do about 18 to 24 hour cure time on the glue. Ended up being probably closer to 3 days. But that's all good. Gives glue more time. But today's the day. Taking all the clamps off, see how well it glued up, and see how smooth the surfaces are. So here we go. So took a look around and took of course all the clamps off. As you can see here, put them all away. Brought out the bench cookies and some bench dogs because I'm going to set up that sheet of plywood here in a second. We'll cover that in just a moment. And for the most part, the glue up was great. There are a couple spots that I'm going to have to clamp down again on the back. The cawls didn't meet up the way I wanted them to. So there's a little bit of a gap, but nothing that's earth-shattering, nothing that's really a concern. Cosmetically, just want to seal that up. Not, like I said, not a big deal. And then at the front, at the very nose, I put a kind of late decision. Put a just to keep the point nice and tight. Of course, I had the piece on the top that you may have seen. Actually, we'll take a look at it here. So we had that piece right there we put in that helps keep the nose nice and tight. But then I put another one there on the bottom after the fact. and unfortunately, one of the screws came in on an angle, and the whole piece didn't seat properly. So I had to go in and correct all that, get it because once I put cut out the bottom and put it in there, it wasn't going to seat flush all the way. So did some corrections on that. But other than that, very happy with how the glue up came. It's tight all the way around, little to no air gaps anywhere. And it's all very solid. Really happy with how solid it came out. So now I got my collapsible MFTs set up with bench cookies and bench dogs. I'm going to put the sheet of 1/2-inch ply up on there and then trace out the boat and then cut out the bottom of the boat. So let's get the sheet of plywood up there. Let's get the boat traced and let's get it cut and see if we can get that put together today. Now the bottom's cut. So you'll see in the video, right? So blue tape again. But before I did the blue tape, you saw me moving the boat body around on the sheet of plywood. Why? Seems like it makes sense to kind of place it in the far back right or far back left or front. Place it in a corner of the sheet in order to minimize any waste or minimize cuts and so on and so forth. Well, I wasn't worried so much about the waste, although we'll use all that material that's left over. But I was more worried about the grain pattern. So I was moving the board around on the sheet to try and get the right balance of the grain. You can see there's a very pronounced dark grain pattern built into this piece. The other side is very plain, almost looks like surfboardish. Which is nice and pretty, but when you look at the other pieces of the boat, there's some dark grain, some light grain. There's a lot of variation in the graining. With the exception of the outside of the hull, it looks pretty uniform, but the inside has variation. So I was trying to get the right look, the right feel to the grain pattern inside the boat, balancing with all the different patterns that were on that sheet of plywood. Kind of, at least for my eye, what looked the best. It may not look the best for others, but looking at all the different pieces of wood that are inside the boat, this one kind of, to me, looked the best with the right amount of variation, the right amount of stability, and the placement of the colors inside the bottom of the boat. So what's next, right? So I did a dry fit. It fit very, very well. A couple spots where I might sand it out a bit because there's a little bit of ripple here or there. Now, when I did the blue tape, I did it right on the line, and then I cut outside the line. And ironically, because of the way it was pencil marked, it fits almost perfectly all the way around. So a few small gaps, but nothing that can't be taken care of with a router. Because what I do plan on doing is, after this is all glued up and put together, I'm going to take either a roundover bit or a chamfer bit and put a little bit of an edge all the way down, probably about a 1/2 inch, because when you're putting this down on the ground, you're moving it around in that. I do want a little bit of a little bit of an edge all the way around the bottom. So that's going to cut into it, and that will help even out that seam. So now it's time for screwing and gluing, right? No, I'm not going to screw this. The number of screws I put in here is about 6, That's, or maybe 8. That's all the screws I want in there, and those were only in there to kind of clamp, help with the clamping for the sides. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to use dowels. So I have some birch dowels. So I'm going to use dowels and glue to put the rest of this together. So I will use smaller dowels around the edge, every, I don't know, 6 to 8 inches, all the way around the bottom. And then for the cross members inside the boat, let's open this up. So those cross members, I'll use some larger dowels to hold the bottom into that. And between that and the glue, that should give more than enough strength to hold this thing together for a long, long time. Gluing around the edges and then gluing on the tops of those cross members, right? And then once it's all glued up, I'll turn it over and wipe down any excess glue, because once it's glued up and everything's in there, cleaning out excess glue inside the boat is going to be a challenge. So I definitely want to carefully turn this over and clean out any excess glue I could possibly reach and give me a nice clean surface for the finishing. Not sure entirely what finish we're going to put on this finally. Definitely something durable, something waterproof. Thinking maybe spar urethane to add some yellow and some color into the wood. But that's kind of the next step with the client, is to figure out, well, now that it's put together and she can see what it's going to look like, now what kind of finish do we want on it? Like I said, spar urethane is pretty durable. Maybe a polyacrylic or some kind of acrylic. We'll kind of see. I'm going to do a little bit of research on what kind of finish to put on. So going to get everything set up here, get my dowels out, get the drill bits all set, and let's start getting the thing put together. So we got all the holes drilled for the dowels and did a dry fit. So dry fit is when after you get all your holes drilled, put dowels in there, not seat them fully, but definitely put the dowels in there all the way around or wherever you have a dowel, and without any glue, just pop them in there and then make sure everything is seated right. Because sometimes the bits travel a little bit if you're not careful. When you're drilling the hole with the pilot bit, sometimes you get a little travel, it'll move in one direction or the other. So you just want to double check everything, make sure it's all nice and snug, and that all your dowels are in the right place. You don't have to make any adjustments. So that's all done. Took all the dowels back out, figured out the clamping strategy. So there's a whole bunch of clamps lined up over there and here on the table. So figured out how we're going to clamp it all down just to give it a little bit more adhesion. You close up a few of those little gaps and just make a really good fit. So next step is, putting the glue on the edge. We're gonna put a bead of glue all the way on this edge and spread it, and then put some glue on this edge here on each of the 3 pieces. Not gonna put any glue here in this corner because I'm not sure that it meets up as snugly as I'd like it to, so I don't want any glue pouring out. So once we get the glue down, we're gonna put this on. And we're using that extended release glue again to give us a little bit more extended working time glue to give us a little bit more time to work with things before the glue really starts to dry and set. And then once we get all that set on, I'll put a couple dowels, probably one in the front, one in the middle, one in the back, just to make sure I get all the dowel holes lined up, and then start gluing in all the dowels. Wiping furiously all along the way, try and keep that glue as controlled as possible so it doesn't end up in the finish. And then we'll put the clamps on in a couple different places. We'll put one here in the front. We'll put a couple down there in the back just to make sure that these that the bottom is pushed up against these pretty solidly. Don't want all the work to go to the dowels. Also want the glue that's on the inner edge here and on top here to also help out with the whole process. So all those things together give it great strength, make it very sturdy, make it, hopefully last a long time. So without any further ado, let's get the other camera set up and let's get gluing. So there it is. All the dowels in, all the clamps on, flipped it up on its side as you saw. A little bit of glue drip on the back and the bottom, a little spot in the back that I'm gonna have to touch up later. But ultimately, everything glued up very nicely. Um, no mess, no big mess, and now we just wait. So like I said, this is an extended working time glue. It says 24 hours before stressing any of the joints. So we'll definitely wait that 24 hours, probably 36. We got other things to be working on in the shop and between now and then, so we won't lose too much time. But definitely gonna just leave this here by itself and then come back in about a day, day and a half, and unclamp and get ready for the next step. Now, I don't expect the dowels to add a ton of strength. Now, when we look at the way that this is glued up, we got an end joint or an end face to the end grain to the face. So it's an okay joint, not the strongest. Um, but then the dowels by themselves, individually, are not going to add a lot of strength. But once we add up the strength created by the glue in the joint and then by all the dowels set all the way around, gives us a really solid connection. And the thing is about wood glue, because some people have said to me before, how can you do this stuff without screws? Because it's going to fall apart without screws. To the contrary, the bond that wood glue creates between the wood and the glue, that bond is stronger than the wood itself in a lot of cases. So I trust that more than I would trust the screw, because what happens with screws are over time, they walk out from heating and cooling and motion. They'll loosen up. They'll walk, and sometimes they'll walk out or back out. Or you'll get from the motion of wood, you'll get some grinding around the teeth and the screw. So I've had more screw failures than I've had dowel or glue failures. So, like I said, I only put a few screws in here just for one purpose, but ultimately they're not put in here to add any strength. The dowels, the glue, the wood itself, those where all the strength will come from. So that's good for today. We're going to move on to dinner time and let this set overnight and then come back tomorrow and start unclamping. Take care. So the clamps are gone. Unclamped a little while ago, put all the clamps away, cleaned up the space a little bit, try and make room for the next step, which the next step is to cut off the excess pieces of the dowels. For that, we'll use our trusty little multi-tool and a random card. And then we'll just, you'll see it here in the video. We'll just put that down, put the card next to it, and then use our bit here to cut right off. It will leave a little bit of a nub behind, but nothing that we can't just sand off later. Now, these ones on the side, they're going to get cut down. But remember, we're going to use a chamfer bit in our palm router to put a chamfer on here. I do have edge dressing. I put edge dressing on that, but just to kind of angle this off a little bit, because with how it's going to be used, this sliding around on the floor, this is going to get chewed up. So we're going to put a nice little chamfer on this to help with the sliding, and also some edge banding to kind of cover it up. It might still show some of the dowels a little bit. We'll see as we get that all routed out. All right, so nothing exciting at the moment, but let's get cutting. So use the multi-tool and cut off the excess of the dowels. and then sanded that down a little bit where the dowels were, because of course they're all still just a little bit proud, maybe 16th or 32nd of an inch, or about 1 millimeter. And then because when we went in to do the routing, we don't want that sticking out any more than we have to, because it just not knowing what it's going to do to the router as we go over it. So sanding those down makes the routing step a little bit easier. Then we went into the routing step, and I originally did a chamfer bit like I planned to, but the result didn't really feel boaty, right? It looked very mechanical, so I decided to do a roundover bit. I think it was a 5/16 roundover bit, and this gave us a rounder feel. So the roundness of this matches the roundness of the hull of the boat, and even though the bottom's flat, it feels a little bit more like a boat. It's the artistic side of it, right? There's no rhyme or reason, but it's got a different feel to it with that rounded edge. So much prefer that. So I did that all the way around on the bottom, and I'm very happy with the result. No tear out. It's pretty smooth, pretty firm. Do have a little bit of a mark here from the actual the bearing on the bit itself. We'll sand that out and taper that down the best we can, and we get in to this final sanding. So there's always something in a project, right? You do designs, you have some things in your head, you have some plans, and this is a commission project, so there is a customer with certain expectations. And one of those expectations was, in the design, just to keep the costs low. The plan was to use edge banding, so we're using, like we said a bunch of times, birch ply. And edge banding is a thin wood veneer, in this case birch. It's a birch thin veneer, and it's anywhere from 1/2 inch to 3/4 inch to 1 inch, depending on what you buy. But it's a wood veneer with a heat activated glue on the back of it. And you basically just iron it on to cover up the end grain here, so you don't see the layers of the ply. So it looks just like this, except on here. Now, as I was looking at it, it's like, well, this is a commission project, and I want it to look great, or as great as possible. And what was in the budget was the edge banding with the veneer. But to make it look better, I actually decided to do some solid wood trim on it instead, with some, glue it on with some dowels just for a little bit more strength, but some of it for appearance. So I went through the different stocks that I've got here. Everything from cherry to black walnut to whatever, and decided on silver maple. I had some pieces of silver maple I just milled a couple weeks ago, so I'm going to use silver maple to do the trim on the boat. And the reason I selected the silver maple is that it has relatively similar color and texture as the birch ply that we're using on the project. So we've got this piece here, which we'll use and use the bandsaw to cut it into shape for the nose here. Got some strips about 20 millimeters thick that we'll cut down the size and put on here, and then use silver maple for this piece in the back. And that's going to add a little bit more character, a little bit more depth to the appearance. It will look different with the spar urethane, a little bit different, but not so much that it is a far reach from how the birch ply will look, but enough that it sets it off just a little bit, adds a little bit of character to the overall design. So no edge bending class today. And essentially what we're going to be doing is cutting pieces to shape. The curves are a challenge, but unfortunately we got a bandsaw which we can cut the curves. So we'll cut the curve, cut the edges in there, doing the straight pieces right now. We're going to clamp those down, let those cure overnight before I come back tomorrow and do the curve pieces, which will take a little bit more time, a little bit more effort. The build is done. So now the boat's all put together. The trim's all done. Very, very happy with the result. As you can see, we put the silver maple trim all the way around the edge. We still have to do final sanding on everything, kind of smooth it out a little bit more. We used dowels on a few, basically all along the trim. Now the glue should be enough to hold it on. The dowels just offer a little bit more shear strength just to keep it together. Plus, it provides an aesthetic. So a little bit of a mechanical feel to the boat because we have dowels on all of our trim all the way around. At the tip of the hull here, in the bow, built up a couple layers of laminated silver maple that we had, which, kind of hiding joints and stuff, but just to add a little bit more texture. Now, when we sand it, we're going to round this out a little bit. Definitely round out the edges of all the trim because it is going to be used for kids, and inevitably a kid might fall. We don't want them to get hurt, so we're going to round off these edges a little bit. So we don't lose the aesthetic, but we make it a little bit safer. And we're going to probably round this out a little bit more just to kind of give it a little bit more organic feel. And our nose looks great. Everything came out well. And then in the back, we have these corners. Some of this stuff is so that when it's being moved around or it's being stood up in a corner for storage, it's not chewing up the plywood. So it acts as a bumper, just like the trim up here. Now you see here we've got a couple samples that we took pictures of to send the client with just the basic spar urethane, no stain. This is what the edging will look like with just the spar urethane, and then this is what the body will look like, a nice golden color. Send over that to the client to see if she would be happy with that, if she likes that look. We didn't budget for any kind of coloring finish, but at the end of the day, we're going to do the right thing and get the customer what she likes. At this point, of course, doing any kind of color difference between the trim and the body would be very challenging because you will get bleed over. There are a couple techniques and tools I've got in the arsenal to prevent that bleed over, but it's not guaranteed. So it comes down to if she does want to color on this, it's going to be the whole thing is going to be that color. Hopefully you'll still get a little bit of color variation between the trim and the body so it stands out, it pops and adds a little bit more character to the build. But, we'll see what she says and how she wants to proceed. So once we get that back from her, we'll finish up the next stage, which is sanding and then working on the finish. Now the sanding's all done. We got everything sanded down with a 120 grit. Could have gone to 220, but I'm going to save that for when we do the sanding in between layers. The first layer I'll do with 120 sand on the body. The second layer I'll do a 220, and then I'll go to a 400 on the third layer of the finish. What we've done is we've taken some blue tape and put it right where the trim meets the body of the boat. Do we need tape? No. What I'd like to do is make sure that we've got as even of a coat as possible around that edge where you're going to see it. And I saw this technique on YouTube. If I can find the video, I didn't bookmark it, so if I can find the video, I will put it in the comments, put it in the description actually. But what they did was to prevent drip spots, because even if you do, take a lot of care sometimes with making sure you don't have any excess finish near your edge, it settles down and sometimes you'll get drip spots, which you got to then sand out. So to avoid that, what they did was they put a piece of painter's tape all the way around the piece that they were working on, and the drips just went down off of that. I did it at a spot where, like I said, the trim actually meets the body, so you can't see it behind the tape, but there's that fine edge right there where the trim meets the body. So it will get in there. Some stuff will still drip out, but it's to prevent a lot of drips and a lot of buildup along the bottom. After we do our 3 coats on the body, then we'll flip it over, take the tape off, and then do the top edge and the inside without the tape. Also, wiping it down with denatured alcohol, cleaning off all the sawdust from the sanding, any final contaminants or debris that are on the body, so that we have the best possible surface. Plus, it causes the grain to pop a bit. Not as much as maybe doing it with water. But like I said, I did a 120 grit rather than a 220. So the technique that's worked very well for me over time has been doing the 120, using the denatured alcohol. And then the final thing is using spar urethane. But the first coat or two, we're actually going to thin down with about probably between 20 and 50% mineral spirits, so we get it to soak in real well. This is not going to be left outside. It's not for outdoor play, other than maybe photo shoots and that. But again, wanting it to be the best finish possible, be as durable as possible. So getting that spar urethane to soak into the wood a little bit more is definitely going to help create a stronger finish. So probably about 3, maybe 4 coats. We're going to do 1, maybe 2 with that 50-50 mix all the way around, and then the last 2 coats will be full spar urethane. Last thing is, it is pretty warm in the shop. The air conditioners are running. We're having an unusually hot June. So it is pretty warm in here. I'm glowing. You see the glow? Glistening. So we're still within range, well within range for this finish to actually do to actually apply it. It says between 50 and I think 92 on this particular product. So we're at about 84 in the shop right now, which is still warm, but got to have a door open. It's cooling off. It's in the evening now. It's cooling off a little bit outside, but got to have a door open in order to vent out the fumes. So I'll be wearing a respirator. Better safe than sorry, but this stuff is very effervescent. So we get the body wiped down, and then we'll get applying that finish. Here we go. So that's it. We did the finish. We sanded in between coats, and we did a couple coats of wax on the boat. And results we're pretty happy with the results. So we get a nice glossy sheen. Now we know that the bottom of the boat is going to get probably marked up and scratched from just being sitting on the floor, and that's fine. But doesn't mean we don't start off with the best that we can. We ended up with about 4 coats of finish all the way around. I think we did 5 on the outside, just because that's going to get the most abuse. But like I said, we're very happy with the results, with the color contrast, with the silver maple for the trim, the birch ply for the outer body, and then birch dowels or beech dowels, sorry, to kind of hold things in place in addition to the glue. And all of them sent it out really, really well. So we're very thankful for the Lord and just how well all this worked out. Customer's going to be here in a little while to come and get it. So can't wait to see her reaction and hope that it serves her well. So as always, close out in a little prayer. Holy Father, we thank you for your blessings. We thank you for all that you provide for us, all that you grant for us, and how you guide us in every single measurement and every single cut. You kept us safe, and we thank you for that. We praise you for the outcomes that we were able to achieve with this project. And as always, we ask that you look after all who watch these videos and all woodworkers, keep them safe and keep their measurements true. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. So that's it for this project. We're already on to probably about 5 or 6 other ones. So stay tuned and keep an eye out as we get those projects going, get some videos released on those. Take care.